The snow fell in quiet, steady sheets, blanketing the narrow trail that twisted through the mountain pass. Each flake seemed to hush the world more, swallowing every sound except the crunch of ice beneath worn boots. 11-year-old Lila stumbled through the snow, her fingers clutching the edges of a thin, patched blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her cheeks were raw from the wind, her lips blue, and her brown boots, 2 sizes too small, were soaked through. "Keep walking," hissed the sharp voice behind her. Lila didn't look back. She didn't need to. She knew that voice, the cold, bitter rasp of her stepmother, Clarice. The woman had never loved her. Never once since the day she married Lila's father, Thomas, 2 years ago. But since his sudden death 3 weeks earlier, the cruelty had turned into something darker. Lila didn't understand why they had left town so suddenly that morning, packing only a few things into the wagon and heading north. Clara said "We're going to visit distant family, someone who'll take a girl like you," she muttered. Now, just 2 miles into the icy pass, Clarice had stopped the wagon and pulled Lila down by the arm. "This is where we part ways," she had said. Flatly. "What?" Lila had gasped, shaking her head, her eyes wide. I said what I needed to say to get you quiet. I've done my part. I married your father. I fed you, clothed you, but I'm not dragging dead weight forever." Clara shoved the warm blanket into the child's hands. "That should keep you warm enough until ... Well." Lila had stood frozen, unable to move as the wagon wheels turned and creaked away. The sound faded into the wind. That had been hours ago. Now, her legs trembled beneath her. Her breath came in short, jagged puffs, and the sky above was turning from gray to black. Night was coming. She collapsed at the base of a snow-covered pine, curling into herself, clutching the blanket like a shield. Tears streamed down her cheeks, hot against the cold. She tried calling for help once, then again, but the wind carried her voice away like it was nothing. The world didn't answer. "I want to go home," she whispered, though there was no home left. Her father's warm voice was just an echo. Now, like the stories he used to tell her by the fire. She pressed her face into her knees. "Papa." The cold crept deeper into her bones. Her fingers, stiff and pale, stopped trembling. That scared her. "Don't fall asleep," she remembered her father once warning her when they were out in the snow. "Sleep is a trick in the cold. It feels warm, but it's not. You have to stay awake." But Lila's eyes were so heavy. Somewhere in the distance, a sound broke through the silence. Faint but rhythmic. A thud, followed by another. A crunching of snow, too steady to be the wind. Hoofbeats. Lila barely lifted her head, thinking she must be dreaming. The sound grew louder, clearer. A dark shape emerged between the trees. A tall horse, chestnut brown, its breath steaming in the frigid air. Atop it rode a figure dressed in a long duster coat and a wide-brimmed hat, dusted with snow. His face was shadowed, unreadable. Horse stopped a few feet from her. The rider didn't speak. For a moment, Lila wasn't sure if he was real. Then, with slow, deliberate movement, he climbed down from the saddle and stepped toward her. His boots crunched into the snow beside her small form. He crouched, and without a word, he pulled a thick fur-lined cloak from his back and wrapped it around her shivering body. Lila blinked up at him, too weak to speak, but her lips moved. "Why?" Still silent, he lifted her gently in his arms. She expected the cold to follow, but the warmth of his coat, of his arms, was overwhelming. She closed her eyes, resting her head against his chest, listening to the sound of his heartbeat. The last thing she heard before drifting into sleep was the sound of hooves again, this time carrying her away from the trail, where she'd been left to die. The morning sun cut through the last of the storm clouds, laying golden light across a vast stretch of snow-covered prairie. Somewhere between the mountains and the edge of the Carter Ranch, A fire crackled in a stone hearth, and a girl lay beneath a quilt thicker than any she'd ever known. Lila's eyes fluttered open. At first, she didn't remember where she was, only that it was warm. Her fingers, once stiff and pale, now curled freely beneath soft wool. Her cheek rested against a feather pillow, and the scent of burning wood, saddle leather, and black coffee lingered in the air. Then it hit her. Clarice. The cold, the trail, the horse, the cowboy. She bolted upright, the quilt slipping from her shoulders. The sudden motion made her dizzy. She blinked hard and looked around. The room was simple but sturdy: log walls, handmade shelves, a rocking chair beside the fire. A large wooden desk stood against the far wall, its surface scattered with papers, maps, and a pocket watch. A coat hung neatly from a rack by the door. A cowboy hat rested beside it. She wasn't alone. Across the room, the man sat in a leather chair, facing the fire. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with graying hair beneath the brim of his hat. He looked older now that she could see his face, clearly tired but not cruel. His eyes were locked on the fire, distant. He turned his head slowly as she stirred, but said nothing. Lila swallowed. Her voice came out cracked and small. "Where am I?" The man didn't answer. She tried again. "Why did you help me?" Still nothing. He stood, walked to the kitchen area, and poured a mug of something hot. He brought it over and placed it gently on the side table beside her bed. "You don't talk?" she asked softly, more curious than afraid. The man shook his head once. Lila watched him. Most men she'd known, especially those with money or land, spoke too much. Loud voices, rough hands, constant commands. But this man, he moved like silence was his second skin. He didn't frighten her. "Thank you," she whispered. He gave a small nod and returned to his chair, picking up a long, carved piece of wood from beside the hearth. He began whittling it with a short knife, wood shavings falling like snow. They sat like that for a long time, no words. Just the fire and the occasional whistle of wind outside. Lila sipped the drink. It was strong, maybe coffee, maybe something else, but it warmed her all the same. Eventually she stood on shaky legs and walked toward the window. Outside stretched the largest ranch she'd ever seen. Wooden fences cut across open land. Horses ran in the distance. Cattle grazed along the hills. The sky was wide, the kind her father used to describe when he spoke of freedom. A single question pressed against her lips. "What's your name?" The man paused. Then, slowly, he pointed toward a leather-bound book on the desk. She walked over and picked it up. On the cover, etched into the worn leather, was a name. Bo Carter. She looked back at him. "You're Mr. Carter?" A flicker of acknowledgement in his eyes. Then he returned to his carving. Lila had heard that name before. In town, the old men spoke of Bo Carter, the wealthiest rancher in the territory. A man who'd built his empire from dirt and dust, who rode alone, spoke to no one, and hadn't been seen in town for years. They said he was broken, that he kept his house closed and his heart colder than the prairie winds. But the man who had carried her from the snow didn't feel cold. He felt like safety. Lila sat back down and looked at the fire. "I don't have anywhere to go," she said quietly. "My stepmother left me. After my papa died, she said I was in the way. I guess she finally meant it." Bo didn't respond. But the way his jaw tightened said he heard every word. And, though he still said nothing, he reached beside him, picked up the blanket that had fallen from her shoulders earlier, and gently laid it back over her legs. In silence, she understood. She wasn't going back to the trail, not ever again. Days passed, marked by the slow rhythm of ranch life and the quiet that filled every corner of the Carter estate. Lila was healing both in body and in spirit, but the silence around her still felt heavy, like the air before a storm. Bo Carter, her silent rescuer, had given her a room of her own, small but warm. A soft bed, a window that opened to the prairie, and a wooden chest at the foot of the bed filled with clean clothes, plain but well made. No one had ever done so much for her without asking anything in return, but Bo didn't speak. Not even once, and neither did the ranch hands. They were kind, nodding when they passed her, tipping their hats, offering a smile or a warm biscuit, but they never lingered. They spoke only when needed and only to each other in hushed tones. It was as if the whole ranch had taken an oath of silence the day she arrived. One afternoon, Lila found herself in the stable, watching the horses being brushed and fed. She was especially drawn to a sandy-colored mare with a gentle temperament. "She's called Junebug," said a voice behind her. Lila jumped. A ranch hand, an older woman with silver hair tied back in a braid, stood by the stall. She had a warm face and a stitched apron. "Didn't mean to scare you," she said. "You're the little miss he brought in." Lila nodded. "Yes, ma'am." The woman smiled kindly. "You can call me Martha. I've been here longer than that barn door, and I don't mind talking now and then." Lila clutched the edge of her coat. "Why doesn't anyone talk around here?" Martha sighed and leaned against the wooden beam. "They follow Bo's way, not because he makes them, but because they respect him. After everything he lost, well, folks just quieted down." "What did he lose?" Lila asked. Martha hesitated. Her eyes drifted toward the horizon where the prairie met the sky. "Years ago," she said slowly, "Bo had a wife. They say she was the heart of this place, laughed louder than thunder and filled this house with music. Her name was Eliza." Lila leaned in. "Then one winter," Martha continued, "she took sick. Real sudden. Fever came in the night and took her by morning. She died right here in that house." Martha's voice softened. Bo never spoke another word after they buried her on the hill. Lila's chest tightened. He loved her that much? More than life, I think. He built all this for her. But when she was gone, he disappeared inside himself. Martha looked at her gently. "You're the first person he's let inside this house in 3 years. Lila swallowed hard. "Why me?" "Maybe because you're just as lost as he was." Later that evening, Lila stood in the parlor, watching Bo stoke the fire. She thought of Eliza, the silence, the wound that had never healed. And something inside her stirred not pity, but understanding. She moved slowly to the piano in the corner of the room. It was covered in dust, keys untouched. She wiped the space clean and pressed a single note. Bo froze. She turned her head. "My papa taught me a song, just one. He used to say it chased away the cold." Bo said nothing. "But he didn't stop." Her so Lila played, haltingly at first, then with more confidence. The notes danced softly through the room, curling around the firelight. It was a simple tune, one her father used to hum while brushing her hair. When the song ended, she looked up. Bo was still standing there, eyes locked on the fire, but there were tears on his cheeks, and for the first time since she arrived, he smiled. Not a big smile, just the smallest curve at the corner of his mouth, but it was enough. Lila realized something in that moment. The ranch wasn't built on silence. It was built on love, and the silence was just what grief left behind. Asterisk. The days grew longer, and the snow began to melt in slow, glittering drips from the rooftops. Winter was loosening its grip on the land, and something inside Lila was thawing too. Life at Carter Ranch began to take on a rhythm. Every morning, Lila woke to the soft clang of the breakfast bell. She dressed quickly, sometimes even before Martha knocked on her door with a warm smile and a plate of eggs. Then, after helping clear the dishes, she wandered outside, never told to work, but never idle either. She fed the chickens, swept the porch, help Martha hang linens and brush the horses. Junebug had become her favorite. The gentle Mare seemed to understand Lila better than most people ever had. And Bo? He watched. Not like someone keeping a wary eye, but like a guardian who didn't know how to say he cared. Each evening, Lila would find him seated in the same leather chair by the fire. Sometimes he'd carve wood. Other times he'd polish a saddle. He still hadn't spoken a word since the day he'd brought her in, but Lila didn't mind anymore. His silence no longer felt like distance, it felt like space. Save space. Still, questions lingered. What would happen when spring truly arrived? Would she be sent away? Was she just a guest? Or something more? One morning, after watching Bo ride off toward the north field with two of his ranch hands, Lila found herself sitting with Martha on the back porch. "Do you think he wants me to stay?" she asked, hugging her knees to her chest. Martha didn't answer immediately. She was sewing a button onto one of Bo's work shirts. Her fingers moved with practiced ease. "I think he wants you to feel safe," she said. "That's more than he's wanted for anyone in a long time. But he doesn't say anything." Martha smiled softly. "Words aren't the only way folks talk, Lila. You know how many people he's let ride Junebug? None. Not a soul. She was his wife's favorite. But you? You brush her, feed her, ride her like it's nothing." Lila thought about that. "He lets me help. But sometimes I still feel like I don't belong." Martha patted her hand gently. "That's not because of him, sweetheart. That's because someone made you feel unwanted for too long. Takes time to unlearn that kind of hurt." That afternoon, while exploring the barn loft, Lila discovered a dusty trunk hidden beneath a canvas tarp. She pulled it open and found old photographs, sepia-toned pictures of a younger Bo, smiling with his arm around a woman with bright eyes and a wildflower in her hair. Eliza. She was beautiful, radiant, even in black and white. There were also children's books, worn stuffed animals, and a small hand-stitched quilt folded carefully at the bottom. Lila touched it gently. It felt like a secret kept safe too long. Later that night, Bo came in from the barn. His coat was wet from the rain that had begun to fall, and his hat dripped quietly onto the floor. He glanced at Lila, who sat at the piano again, this time practicing with more confidence. She stopped when she saw him. "I found the box," she said quietly. In the barn loft, Bo's eyes met hers. He didn't flinch. He just nodded once. "I didn't mean to snoop," she added quickly. Still no words. But Bo stepped closer and placed something on the piano. It was a small wooden carving of a bird in flight, smooth and simple. She recognized it as the one he'd been whittling since her first day here. "For me?" she asked. He nodded again. She held it close and smiled. I think I'm starting to feel like I belong here." He looked at her for a long moment, then raised one hand and placed it gently on her shoulder. Just that. But it meant everything. In that touch, she felt it. Trust. Not just hers, but his too. Two people, one broken by loss, the other by abandonment, learning slowly, quietly, to trust again. Spring came with a rush green bursting from the earth, wildflowers dotting the hills, and warm winds sweeping the last of winter's sorrow off the land. Lila's cheeks had color again. She laughed now, sometimes just a little, sometimes loudly. When Junebug nuzzled her for apples, or when Martha told her old stories from town. The girl who had arrived on death's doorstep now ran across open fields, braided horse manes, and played tunes on the old piano as if the ranch had always been hers. But peace has a way of drawing out the past. One April morning, while Lila was filling the chicken feeder, a cloud of dust rose on the road beyond the pasture. A wagon approached faster than most. The horses snorted and pulled hard as the driver yanked the reins. Stopping just outside the main gate, Lila didn't recognize the wagon at first, but when the woman stepped down, her dress too fine for a ranch, her mouth twisted in that same familiar scowl, Lila's breath caught in her throat. Clarice, the stepmother. She hadn't changed much, still sharp features, still bitter eyes. But now her smile was tight and practiced, like someone trying to sell something rotten wrapped in silk. Lila, Clarice called sweetly. There you are. Lila didn't move. Martha came running from the porch, drying her hands on her apron. Her eyes narrowed the moment she saw the stranger. You must be the woman who left this child to die in the snow, she said coolly. Clarice's smile faded. That's a rather ugly way to put it. It's the truth, Martha replied. Lila took a step back. Her stomach twisted. Her heart beat so loudly she couldn't hear the wind. Darling, Clarice said, forcing the smile again, you must come with me. I've spoken to the sheriff. You're still my responsibility. This ranch, she cast a disdainful glance around, is no place for a young lady. It's time you returned home. Home. The word felt poisonous on her lips. Just then, the door of the ranch house opened. Bo stepped onto the porch, his boots heavy on the wood. He didn't speak, of course, but the look in his eyes was enough to turn every head. His presence alone felt like thunder. Clarice looked at him with mild interest, adjusting her hat. You must be Mr. Carter, she said. I'm Clarice Mallory, Layla's stepmother. I've come to take her back. Surely you understand keeping another man's child without consent is questionable at best. Bo didn't answer. He just walked down the steps slowly, eyes locked on Clarice, stopping a few feet in front of her. Clarice's confidence wavered slightly. You seem like a respectable man, Mr. Carter, but this, she gestured toward Lila, isn't your business. Bo reached inside his coat pocket. Lila watched as he pulled out a folded paper. With calm, deliberate motion, he handed it to Clarice. She unfolded it, eyes scanning the words. Her face turned red. Adoption papers? She snapped. This is ridiculous. You can't. He can, said Martha. Signed and sealed by Judge Harris last week. Lila's legally his ward now. Clarice's eyes darted between the paper and Lila. You don't understand what you're doing. That girl isn't worth the trouble. She's just enough, came a voice. Clarice blinked out, so did Lila. And hadn't come from Martha. Had come from Bo. One word. Steady, deep, cold as a mountain river. Clarice stepped back slightly. Stunned. Bo stepped forward, his eyes locked on her with quiet fire. You abandoned her, he said, voice rough but firm. You left her to die. Clarice opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She belongs here now, he added, and she's not going anywhere. The silence that followed was deafening. Clarice narrowed her eyes, tossed the papers back toward Bo, and turned sharply on her heel. You'll regret this, she hissed as she climbed back into her wagon. Bo didn't flinch. Lila watched as the wagon turned and vanished in a trail of dust. When it was gone, she turned to Bo. You spoke, she whispered. He looked down at her, then knelt to her level. I had to, he said quietly. She needed to hear it. Layla blinked tears from her eyes. And me? You need to know you're wanted, he said. She threw her arms around him, and for the first time, he hugged her back. Not just as a rescuer, but as a father. Asterisk. News of Bo Carter's voice spread faster than wildfire through the nearby towns. For years, people had spoken of him in whispers, the richest man in the county, the silent ghost of the prairie. Some had never heard him utter a word. Others doubted he even could. But when word got out that he had spoken for a girl not his, blood, even the saloon in Dry Ridge, fell quiet for a night. Back at the ranch, life continued. But everything had changed. For Lila, hearing Bo speak was like the earth shifting beneath her. It wasn't just the words, it was how he said them. firm, clear, like breaking along. Painful silence wasn't hard if it meant protecting her dot in the days that followed. Bo didn't go back to being completely silent. He still didn't say much, but the wall had cracked. Now Lila caught small things, soft good mornings, short instructions to the ranch hands, a quiet thank you when Martha handed him his coffee. Each word felt like a gift. A piece of himself returned. One afternoon, Lila was in the barn brushing Junebug's mane when Bo walked in. He stood by the stall for a moment, watching her with a distant look. "You ride well," he said finally. Lila froze, then turned toward him with a small smile. "You've been watching." "I see a lot," he replied. She stepped toward him, slowly holding the brush. "Why did you stop talking? After your wife?" Bo didn't answer immediately. He reached out and ran his hand gently along Junebug's neck, his fingers working through the horse's thick mane. "Eliza," he said at last. "She was everything." Lila stayed quiet, listening. "When she died, the house went quiet. I didn't want to hear my voice without hers." His voice wavered but didn't break. It felt wrong. Like anything I said would just echo back emptier. Lila lowered her eyes. "I think I understand. When my father died, it felt like the world went quiet too. Like someone turned all the color off." Bo looked at her, then really looked. "And yet you keep singing, playing, laughing." "I try," she whispered. "Sometimes it still hurts, but I think he'd want me to live." Bo nodded slowly. "Eliza would too." They stood in silence again, but it was a peaceful one shared, not lonely. Later that evening, Lila sat by the fireplace, sketching in a little notebook Martha had given her. Bo was seated across from her, whittling as always, though now the pile of small wooden animals was growing. She looked up from her drawing. "Mr. Carter?" He glanced at her. "Why me? Why did you stop that day and pick me up? You could have just ridden past." Bo set his carving down. His eyes met hers, steady and full of something she hadn't seen in many grown men gentleness. "I saw a little girl who'd been left in the cold," he said. "And I knew what that kind of cold felt like." Lila swallowed. "You mean inside?" He nodded. "Inside's the worst kind." She stood, walked over, and sat on the rug by his chair, resting her head against his knee. "I'm glad you stopped," she said. Bo reached down and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Me too." That night, Lila returned to her room and opened the quilted chest at the foot of her bed. Inside lay the small bird carving Bo had given her, along with the old quilt from the barn, a couple of her papa's letters, and a new photograph of herself on Junebug. One of the ranch hands had taken it just days before. This, she realized, was her treasure box now. But not just full of things she had lost, things she had gained. That same night, Bo stood at the window of his study, looking out at the stars. Eliza's portrait still hung on the wall. He walked to it, touched the edge of the frame, and whispered, "I found someone who needed me." And though the house still carried quiet, it no longer echoed with grief. It echoed with life. Spring ripened into summer, and the Carter Ranch bloomed. Wildflowers spilled over fence posts. Bees buzzed lazily through the air. The horses galloped freely across golden fields, their manes flying like flags of joy. And in the heart of it all, Lila laughed. She wasn't the frightened girl who had arrived months ago, with frostbitten fingers and a heart full of silence. She was strong now, confident, dusty with the sun in her hair and calluses on her palms from swinging a rake or hauling hay. And Bo Carter? He was changing, too. Not all at once. But every day the ranch hands noticed it. The lines on his face seemed less deep. He was speaking more, even smiling when Lila raced across the field on Junebug or showed him a wildflower tucked behind her ear. He was still quiet, still firm. But the hollowness was gone, And then came the town's harvest fair. It was the first time in years Bo Carter had been seen in Dry Ridge. The moment he walked into town with Lila by his side, conversations froze mid-sentence. Horses stopped pawing the dirt. The blacksmith dropped his hammer. No one said a word as the pair passed Bo. In his long brown coat, Lila with a braid down her back and boots dusted with prairie dirt. Sheriff Green tipped his hat, clearly stunned. "Didn't think I'd see the day, Carter." Bo nodded. "Thought it was time." Lila clung to his side but beamed. She'd never been to a fair before. There were pies, fiddle music, horseshoe games, and rows of quilts fluttering like sails. In the wind. As they walked through town, people slowly began to approach. First cautiously, then warmly. "Is this your daughter, Bo?" asked the town baker. Bo looked down at Lila and then said with a quiet certainty, "She is." Lila's chest swelled. That word, daughter. She hadn't heard it in so long. That afternoon, Lila entered the pie contest with one of Martha's old recipes. She didn't win, but when she brought the half-eaten pie to Bo afterward, he took a bite and said, "Best I've had in 20 years. Later, as the sun dipped behind the hills and lanterns lit up the town square, Bo stood with Lila watching couples dance beneath strings of yellow light. Music floated in the air, sweet and slow. A young woman approached, smiling kindly. "Would your daughter like to dance with the children?" Lila hesitated and looked up at Bo. She didn't say a word, but he understood. He knelt beside her. "Go on," he said. "You belong here." She did. As she ran off laughing, barefoot in the dirt. Bo stood watching her for a long time until the sheriff walked up beside him. "You've changed, Carter," he said. Bo gave a half smile. "She changed me," the sheriff nodded. "Funny how the smallest ones bring us back to life." When they returned to the ranch that night, the sky was thick with stars. Bo tucked Lila in, something he now did without thinking. She yawned, then looked up at him, eyes wide and tired. "Do you think she'd be proud?" she asked. "Who?" "Your Eliza." Bo paused, then sat at the edge of the bed. "I think she'd love you, Lila," she smiled sleepily. "I love her too, even if I never met her." And Bo, so often guarded, always composed, reached over and gently brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "Your family now," he said softly, "not by blood, but by choice." Lila closed her eyes with a peace she'd never known. Not in town. Not with Clarice. Not even before her father passed. This ranch was hers. This man, weathered and silent, was her family. And every broken piece they carried had somehow fit together to make something whole. Something new. Something beautiful. A new kind of family. Asterisk. Prairie had a way of remembering. It remembered every hoof print, every whisper of wind, and every soul who had crossed its wild open stretch. Somewhere among that vastness, the trail where Lila had once been left to die still existed, twisting between the trees. Quiet, cold, forgotten by most, but not by her. Not by Bo. Summer had settled into a golden calm. Wheat swayed in the wind. Rivers ran clear and warm. And every evening a soft glow hung over the Carter Ranch like a gentle blessing. One morning, Bo saddled up 2 horses, Junebug for Lila and Flint, his old gray, for himself. He didn't say much, but Lila knew. Something was different. He packed a blanket, a canteen, and 2 sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. "Where are we going?" she asked, already climbing onto Junebug's saddle. He met her eyes steady. "Back to the beginning." They rode for nearly 2 hours, through hills and past the high ridge where hawks circled. The trees thickened as they moved toward the edge of the forest. Eventually, they came upon the place, the narrow, winding trail shadowed by pines. Lila knew it instantly. Everything in her chest went still. The memories pressed in like the wind that day, cold, biting, full of fear. "I think it was here," she whispered. Bo nodded and dismounted. He walked ahead a few steps, then stopped at a crooked tree with bark missing from its side. I found you here, he said quietly. Curled up by that trunk. Lila stayed on Junebug, hands tight on the reins. I was so cold. I thought I was going to disappear. But you didn't, he replied. You stayed. She finally slid down and joined him, boots crunching lightly in the grass. Why did you bring me back? She asked, though the answer was already blooming inside her. To show you, he said, that this is where the trail ended. For the girl who was left. Lila turned to him, brow furrowed, and where it began. He added, for the girl who was found. Her throat tightened. I'm not the same girl anymore. No, Bo said, looking out over the trail. You're not. They sat on the blanket and ate their lunch in the sun. The silence between them was soft now, like old music, not loneliness. Lila stared at the path and thought of how far she'd come. Sometimes I still think about her, she said. Clarice, I wonder if she ever thinks about me. Bo was quiet for a moment, then said, some people spend their lives running from what they've done. Others make peace with it. But your story isn't hers anymore. She nodded. I don't hate her. I just don't want to carry her with me. You don't have to, Bo said. You've built something new. And you did it with your own 2 hands. Lila smiled and rested her head against his shoulder. With a little help from a silent cowboy. He chuckled, deep and low, the kind of laugh that had been buried for years. They stayed there until the sun began to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows on the trail. On the ride home, Lila looked over her shoulder one last time at the path. The same place that had once been her ending now looked small, distant, powerless. That night, back at the ranch, Martha placed a hand-sewn banner above the fireplace. It read, Carter Ranch, Est. Again, 1889. Beneath it, a new family photo was placed on the mantel. Bo standing tall, Lila beside him holding Junebug's reins. Martha, the ranch hands, all of them smiling. All of them home, before bed. Bo stood at Lila's door. I was wrong, he said softly. Lila tilted her head. About what? This isn't where the trail ended, he replied. It's where it finally made sense. Lila nodded, tears in her eyes. Good night, Papa. He hesitated, then leaned forward and kissed her forehead. Good night, my girl. And in that moment, the trail was no longer a memory of abandonment. It was the beginning of a story about being found, a story about family, a story where love, though late, arrived right on time.